A fat girl was sold to a Hell's Angel by her own mother to clear a gambling debt. Everyone thought he'd hurt her, but what he did next changed her life forever. She's terrified when he takes her away, until she realizes this biker isn't who the world thinks he is. Behind the leather, behind the scars, he's a broken man with a secret that could break her heart too. In a world that judged her body and his past, they find something no one saw coming: kindness, faith, and a second chance. But when her mother returns with a threat that could destroy them both, one choice will test everything they've built. Will the girl who was sold for a debt find the courage to fight for the man who bought her freedom? Or will her past drag them both back into the darkness? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The sun had already gone down when Maddie Brooks stepped off the town bus with her purse clutched tight to her chest. The sky over the Arizona desert still held a strip of orange at the edge, but the streetlights flickered on in the trailer park. Heat rose from the cracked road even after dark. A dog barked somewhere, sharp and scared. Maddie's feet hurt from the double shift at the diner. Grease clung to her hair and clothes, and her cheap sneakers squeaked as she hurried past the broken fence and the dry, weedy lots. She knew the look of trouble. You could smell it, like hot metal and old beer. The closer she got to her mother's trailer, the more she smelled both. A line of motorcycles sat in the dirt, with chrome shining under the yellow park lights. Men leaned against them, leather vests patched with skulls and wings. The rumble of engines came and went in short bursts, like growls cut off by a leash. Maddie slowed. Her heart tapped high in her throat. She had seen these men before, riding through town, loud and heavy, like a storm on wheels. People always turned to stare. She never had this many parked outside her home. The trailer door hung open. Light spilled onto the warped steps. Her mother's voice came from inside, fast and sharp, the way it got when she was trying to talk herself out of a bad corner. Another voice answered, low, steady, controlled. Maddie swallowed and went up the steps. The floor inside dipped under her weight. The living room was small and messy, stuffed with old magazines, a dead fern, and a couch with thread showing through the arms. The air was heavy with smoke, and the sweet stink of spilled liquor. Her mother stood near the sink with a drink in her hand, and eyeliner smudged under one eye. Two men in leather vests flanked the doorway, and at the table sat a man whose presence changed the whole room. He was tall even while sitting, shoulders wide, skin sun-browned and scarred. His hair was cut short, a little gray at the sides. A patch on his chest read, Lawson. His eyes were pale and steady, like a winter sky that had seen everything and would see more. Maddie, her mother said, too bright, like a sales clerk pushing a useless item. There you are. Sweetheart, come here. Maddie didn't move right away. She set her purse on the counter and wiped her palms on her apron. What's going on? She asked. She kept her voice soft so it wouldn't crack. The man at the table looked at her and looked away. He didn't leer. He didn't smile. He took up his paper cup of black coffee and drank, then set it down, careful and quiet, the way a man sets down a heavy thing without wanting it to make a sound. Her mother tossed back her drink and slammed the plastic cup on the counter. These gentlemen are here about my little misunderstanding, she said. She waved a hand. Tiny issue. Grown-up business. One of the men by the door snorted. The other one said nothing. Maddie looked from the motorcycles outside to the strong, silent man at the table. Mom, she said, how much do you owe? Her mother rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. She glanced at the man with the pale eyes. "Tell her it's nothing." He didn't answer her. He spoke to Maddie instead. "The number's not the problem," he said. His voice was deep, like gravel rolled in a steel drum. "The choices are." Maddie's fingers found the pendant on her necklace, an old heart-shaped locket with a faded photo of her grandmother tucked inside. Her hands shook. "I'll pick up more shifts," she said. "I'll pay. I can talk to the bank. We can figure this out." "You've been figuring this out since you were 15, her mother snapped, and then, softer, wheedling. "Honey, they need collateral, just for now, just until I square this up." The room tilted a little. Maddie knew the words collateral from the bank and from late-night TV, but she had never heard them used like that. "Collateral," she said. "Mom, what do you mean?" Her mother moved closer and took Maddie's hands. Her rings cut into Maddie's fingers. "You're safe with them," she said, and her breath smelled like cheap whiskey and mint gum. "Safer than with those wolves at the bank. They'll treat you. Fine. Just go with them for a while. They'll see I'm good for it." Maddie felt her mouth go dry. The room got quiet, except for the old fridge humming and a bike revving outside. She looked at the man at the table again. He was watching their hands. He looked tired, but not in the way of a man who didn't sleep. Tired in the way of a man who had carried other people's loads for a long time. "I'm not a thing," Maddie said. It came out small. "Of course you're not," her mother said quickly, and then her eyes hardened. "But words are just words, Maddie. This is the world. Sometimes we do what we have to." Maddie pulled her hands away. She took a step back and hit the counter. The plastic cup fell, rolled, and dropped. The sound made everyone glance down for a second, and then the room was still again. "How much?" Maddie asked, her voice low. Her mother named a number. It felt like a punch. It was more than Maddie would make in a year and still keep the lights on. The man at the table tapped his finger on the cup once, twice, 3 times. Then he stood. Up close, he seemed even larger, but it wasn't just size, it was weight, authority. He had a scar that ran from his jaw to his neck, clean and old. "Name's Rhett Lawson," he said. "I'm not here to take a person." He looked at the mother. "I'm here to end a problem." Her mother laughed, high and shaky. "Same difference." Rhett's eyes cooled another shade. He nodded to one of the men by the door. The man reached into his vest and pulled out a folded envelope. He set it on the table. Maddie saw the thick corners, the rubber band. Cash. Rhett tapped the envelope, then pushed it toward her mother. "Debt's paid," her mother blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Rhett said. "And the girl?" asked the man by the door, almost too low to hear. Rhett turned his head slightly. "No one touches her." Then, to Maddie, in that same even tone, "You can stay here. You can come with us. Either way, this debt isn't yours anymore." Her mother's mouth fell open. "That's not the deal." Rhett looked at her mother, and she shut up. No curse, no threat, just a look like a steel door sliding shut. Maddie's throat burned. She wanted to cry or run or sink into the floor. She also wanted to breathe for the first time in years. Her heart said leave. Her fear said stay. She thought of the trailer with its leaks and lonely nights. She thought of how many times she had paid her mother's late fees and carried her to bed and forgiven again and again. Rhett reached into his pocket and set a key on the table. It was small and brass, with a round tag stamped garage. "I need someone who can cook and keep books," he said. "I pay fair. You leave when you want. If you come as a person, not a price." Her mother tossed her hair. "She doesn't have to leave with you. She can work it off here. We'll pay you back monthly." Rhett didn't look at her mother again. He kept his eyes on Maddie. "Your choice," he said. Maddie's legs felt heavy. She picked up her purse. The strap dug into her shoulder. She remembered mornings at the diner when she watched the sun rise through the greasy blinds and promised herself that someday she would go someplace clean and quiet, even if it was just for a little while. She remembered a girl who believed people could change. Her mother reached for her arm. "You're not going with them," she said, voice shaking. "You belong to me." Something inside Maddie straightened. It wasn't anger. It was a small, steady flame. She set her hand over her locket one more time, then lifted her chin. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, and she heard how clear it sounded in the small room. Rhett nodded once, like he had expected that answer, like he had been waiting. "Let's go," he said. The man by the door stepped aside. Maddie grabbed her cardigan from the chair. It was frayed at the wrists. She paused at the door and looked back. Her mother stood there with her lips parted and a wild, lost stare that flashed between insult and fear. For a second, Maddie almost crossed the room and hugged her. For a second, she wanted to be needed again, even if need felt like a chain. But then she saw the envelope of money on the table, fat and silent, and knew what would happen if she stayed. The lights would go on for a month, and the bottle would open, and the wolves would come back in a different patch, in a different truck, with a different deal. "I'll call you," Maddie said softly. "Please, try to be okay." Her mother laughed that bright, cracked laugh again, and turned away. "Don't forget where you came from," she said, and it sounded like a threat, and it sounded like a prayer. Outside, the night air was dry and smelled like dust and engine oil. The bikes shone under the streetlights. Men stood and watched without a word. Rhett led her past them, not touching her. He opened the passenger door of a black pickup. The seat was clean. A jacket lay folded on the floorboard. "Thank you," Maddie whispered as she climbed in. Rhett shut the door and walked around to the driver's side. He started the engine, and the truck purred to life. They rolled out of the trailer park with the bikes idling behind them like watchful dogs. Maddie stared through the windshield at the road. Mobile homes slid by, then scrub brush, then open desert studded with saguaro and black rock. The stars came out strong and close. The truck's dash lights lit Rhett's hands on the wheel, scarred knuckles, clean nails, calm grip. He drove like a man who didn't rush unless he had to. A mile down the road, he said, "You hungry?" She thought of the diner leftovers in her bag. Cold meatloaf, mashed potatoes in a lidded cup. "A little," she said. "I have food." "We'll stop," he said, and a few minutes later he pulled into a small roadside market. He left the engine on. "Lock the door behind me." Maddie did what he said. She watched him in the bright front windows of the store, big and steady among fridges and racks of chips. He paid the clerk with cash and walked out with a brown sack. When he climbed back in, he handed her a sandwich wrapped in paper and a bottle of water. "Turkey, no mustard," he said. "Guess." She smiled, surprised by the joke. "Lucky guess," she said, and he gave a small nod, not quite a smile, but close. They ate in quiet. The bread was soft and the meat salty, and the cold water felt like mercy. She didn't know why she wanted to cry again, but she did. She blinked the tears away and stared at the dashboard clock. The seconds flicked by like soft taps. After a while, he said, "You can ask me anything." Maddie looked at him. In the dim cab, his profile was sharp, strong nose, a line at the mouth that said he didn't waste words. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "Because I could," he said. A beat later, he added, "And because somebody should have helped a long time ago." She didn't know if he meant her or himself. Maybe both. She held that thought like a warm stone. They crossed the town border and took a 2-lane highway that cut through low hills. Every few minutes, the truck passed a reflective sign with bullet dents. Far off, lightning stitched a thin line across a cloud, silent from this distance. The night pressed gentle and wide around them. "She'll be mad," Maddie said at last. "My mom, she'll come back at you." "Maybe," he said. "That's my problem, not yours." "It still scares me." "Fear's honest," he said. "It tells the truth about danger. It just doesn't tell the whole truth." "What's the whole truth?" "That you're not alone anymore." The words settled over her. She watched her hands open and close in her lap, half expecting the fear to grab them like it always did. It didn't, not in the same way. There was fear, yes, but also space around it. Space she had never felt before. The highway turned to a frontage road, then to a cracked lane that led toward a cluster of tin roofs and dark shapes. A long, low building stood at the end with a faded sign that once said Lawson Auto, but the last letter had fallen off, and now it read Lawson Auti. A tall fence wrapped the lot. A single motion light clicked on as they pulled in, shooting a bright cone across the gravel. "This is my place," he said. He parked by a roll-up door and shut off the engine. "You can sleep in the loft if you want. It's clean." He got out and came around to her side, but waited for her to open the door herself. Inside the garage, the air smelled of oil and warm metal, and something like soap. The cement floor was swept. A pegboard held tools by size and shape, neat as a school chart. An old radio sat silent on a workbench. Laundry hung from a line in the corner. Plain shirts, a flannel, socks clipped with wooden pins. Rhett hit a switch, and a stair light blinked on. "Up there," he said. "It ain't fancy, but it's safe." Maddie climbed the wooden stairs. Her steps echoed. At the top was a small loft with a low ceiling, a clean twin bed with a blue quilt, a tiny table with a lamp, and a square window that looked out over the lot. A small Bible lay on the table under the lamp. Next to it was a plate covered in plastic wrap. Under the wrap sat 2 eggs and a biscuit she recognized, not from the market, but from someone's kitchen. The eggs were cold now, but they looked cooked with care. She put her purse on the floor and ran her hand over the quilt, feeling the raised seams. She set her shoes by the bed and stood in the middle of the room, feeling the quiet. Not the thin quiet of fear. A steady quiet, like the inside of a church when nobody is there. Downstairs she heard Rhett moving around, dragging a chair, closing the big door. A bolt slid into place with a sound that made her shoulders drop. "Safe," the sound said. "You are safe tonight." She sat on the bed and unwrapped the plate. She ate a bite of biscuit. It tasted like butter and maybe a hint of rosemary. She smiled without meaning to. She wrote a quick note in her phone, a habit she had made when life felt blurry. 3 things that were good. I am not in the trailer. I ate a real sandwich. A man with hard eyes told the truth, and it helped. She stood and looked out the small window. The motion light clicked off, and the lot sank back into shadow. Stars burned over the desert like holes punched in a dark sheet. Somewhere outside, a night bird called. The sound fell sweet and simple across the yard. Maddie lay down. The mattress dipped under her body. She knew that tomorrow would bring new questions. She knew her mother. She knew how a promise could turn to smoke. But the bed was real, and the quilt was warm, and the lock had slid into place. Her breathing eased. She looked at the Bible by the lamp and thought of the prayers she used to say when she was little. She couldn't come up with fancy words, so she whispered, "Thank you," and let that be enough. Below her, the garage settled into the kind of quiet that old buildings make. Pops, small sighs, wood remembering the day. Rhett's footsteps moved once across the floor and stopped. The night held. The fear didn't vanish, but it didn't run the show either. It sat in a chair by the wall and watched the lamp glow. When sleep pulled at her, she let it. She fell into it like a pool of clear water after a summer day, and the last thought she had before she went under was not about money or shame or debt, or even the face of the man at her mother's table. It was one plain word that rose in her chest and stayed there like a steady drum. Safe. Outside, lightning flashed again, far away, thin and silver. The desert wind shifted, carrying a cool edge that hinted at rain. In the garage loft, Maddie slept while the motorcycles rested like quiet horses under the stars, and the man who had said, "Debts paid," sat with his back to the wall, eyes on the door, keeping watch he hadn't promised but had already chosen. By morning, the night would give up its hold on the edges of the land. Dawn would come, pale and soft, and the garage would wake with the clink of tools and the smell of coffee. But for now there was nothing to do, and nothing to fix. There was only the steady thrum of a truck engine cooling, the long breath of a building at peace, and the small, brave hope of a woman who had walked out of a trap and into a story she did not yet understand, and the road that had brought her here ran behind them, quiet and empty, waiting for whatever would come next. When the morning light reached the little window in the loft, Maddie woke to the sound of a hammer tapping somewhere below. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. The smell of oil and fresh coffee rose through the cracks in the floorboards, warm and strange but not unpleasant. Then she remembered. The truck ride, the garage, and the man with the quiet eyes who had said, "Debts paid." She sat up slowly, her back stiff from the unfamiliar bed, and brushed her hair with her fingers. Her sneakers waited neatly by the door, still dusty from last night. She slipped them on, pulled her cardigan close, and tiptoed down the wooden stairs. Rhett was already working when she reached the bottom. He stood by a car with its hood up, sleeves rolled past his elbows. Morning light poured through the big roll-up door, catching dust in the air like glitter. A radio played low, a country song about lost highways. He glanced at her once, then back at the engine. "There's breakfast on the table." She turned. On a small workbench sat a plate with scrambled eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee. The sight made her throat tighten. No one had made her breakfast in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, picking up the plate. He only nodded, busy with a wrench. The silence felt heavy at first, but not cruel. It was the silence of people who didn't yet know what to say. She ate slowly, watching him from the corner of her eye. He moved with care, every motion deliberate. His hands were strong but gentle, like he was fixing something precious, not metal. When she finished eating, she cleared her plate and looked for a sink. "Where should I wash this?" He wiped his hands on a rag and pointed towards the back. "Through that door. There's a sink and some shelves. You'll find a broom too if you're looking to stay busy." Maddie smiled faintly. "I like staying busy." He gave a small grunt of approval and went back to work. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Maddie swept the floor, organized the tools on the wall, and washed a few greasy rags. The garage had rhythm, hammers, metal clinks, wind slipping through the cracks. It was peaceful in its own rough way. By noon, a few more men arrived on bikes. They were loud and friendly, their laughter echoing off the metal walls. Rhett's expression softened as he greeted them. They called him boss, but with warmth, not fear. One of them, a stocky man with a beard streaked with gray, winked at Maddie and said, "So you're the new hand. Don't let him scare you. He just looks mean." Maddie smiled shyly. Rhett didn't correct him. He only handed the man a wrench and said, "Get back to work, Tanker." The men teased each other, traded jokes, and worked side by side with easy comfort. Maddie noticed how Rhett never barked orders. He just gave short instructions that everyone followed without question. Later that day, a truck pulled up outside, and 2 veterans came in for lunch. Maddie watched as Rhett served them himself, paper plates loaded with sandwiches. The men thanked him, and one clapped Rhett's shoulder, calling him brother. When they left, Maddie asked softly, "Do they come here often?" "Every few days," Rhett said, wiping his hands. "Some of them don't have much. We feed who needs feeding. Fix a few bikes for free, too." She blinked. "You do that quietly?" He shrugged. "Don't need applause to do right." The answer hung in the air, simple and honest. Maddie felt something stir in her chest. Respect, maybe, or something deeper she didn't want to name yet. That night, the bikers left one by one, the engines fading down the road until the lot was empty again. Maddie climbed the stairs to her loft after washing the last plate. She paused at the railing and looked down. Rhett was sitting on a stool, turning a wrench in his hands, staring at nothing in particular. On the workbench beside him sat a small, framed photograph, its glass cracked. Maddie leaned closer, squinting. It showed a little girl with light hair and a missing front tooth, grinning in the sunlight. Rhett saw her glance at it and said, "She was 9. Maddie froze. "Your daughter?" He nodded once. "Leukemia. Been 12 years. She hesitated. "I'm sorry." He didn't look up. "Everybody's sorry. Doesn't change much." She stepped down one stair, her voice gentle. "Maybe not, but being sorry means we remember." He met her eyes for the first time since the conversation started. Something softened in his face, a crack in the armor. "Good night, Maddie," he said quietly. "Good night," she answered, her heart heavy and warm all at once. She climbed the last few steps and turned off the light. Down below, Rhett stayed at the table for a long while, staring at the photo. When he finally rose, he placed the picture upright and whispered something too low for her to hear. The garage fell silent, except for the hum of the old radio. Maddie lay awake a little while longer, thinking about the man downstairs, the one the world feared, who fed strangers and talked to ghosts. Somehow, in this strange place full of metal and memory, she felt a fragile kind of peace. For the first time in years, she didn't dread tomorrow. She whispered into the dark, "Maybe God didn't forget me after all." Then the desert wind brushed the window, and she drifted into sleep. The morning sun crept through the dusty garage windows, laying gold streaks across the concrete floor. Maddie stretched, the sound of tools clinking faintly below, letting her know Rhett was already up and working. She brushed her hair, tied it into a loose ponytail, and went downstairs with careful steps, not wanting to intrude but feeling drawn to the steady rhythm of the place. Rhett looked up briefly from the engine he was fixing. "Coffee's fresh," he said simply, nodding towards the pot on the counter. "Thanks," she said softly. The smell filled the air, strong and rich. She poured herself a cup and took a sip, wincing a little at the bitterness, but finding comfort in it anyway. It had been 3 days since she arrived. The fear she carried that first night had quieted, replaced by an uneasy calm. The men who came and went treated her kindly, calling her Miss Maddie or the cook, never once with the cruelty she expected. They didn't stare or whisper. They worked hard and laughed often. After breakfast, Rhett handed her a box of receipts and a calculator. "You said you worked in a diner. You ever keep books?" "I handled the register sometimes," she said. He nodded. "That'll do. Keep track of what we spend on food, gas, and parts. Doesn't have to be fancy?" She smiled, relieved to have something useful to do. Sitting at the small desk in the corner, she organized the papers, marking totals in neat lines. The numbers felt like small puzzles she could fix, something orderly in a world that rarely made sense. At noon, the bikers took a break for lunch. Maddie had made chili with cornbread, and the smell brought them in laughing. "You cook like my grandma," one of them said with a grin. "If you ever get tired of him, come run my kitchen." Rhett shot him a glare, and the man raised both hands in mock surrender. The group laughed, and Maddie blushed but smiled anyway. "You cook real food," Rhett said quietly after they ate, gathering plates. "Haven't had that in a while." "I like feeding people," she said. "Makes me feel needed." He didn't answer, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something like understanding. That afternoon, while sweeping near the workbench, Maddie noticed the photo again, the little girl with the missing tooth. The glass was still cracked. She hesitated before speaking. "Do you want me to fix the frame?" Rhett paused mid-turn of the wrench. "It's fine," he said. "I could just clean the glass. It wouldn't take long." He exhaled slowly and set down his tool. "All right. Be careful with it." Maddie smiled, gently picking up the frame. She carried it to the table, removed the glass, and wiped it clean. But as she set it back, it slipped, cracking down the center with a sharp sound. "Oh no," she gasped. "I'm so sorry." Rhett turned, eyes flashing for a second, not in rage, but in raw hurt. He walked over, picked up the picture, and stared at it. Maddie stood frozen, her chest tight. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "You didn't." He sighed, setting it down gently. "It was already broken. You just reminded me." She looked up, startled by the honesty in his voice. "She looks like she laughed a lot," Maddie said softly. "She did," he murmured. "Sounded like church bells. She loved painting. Wanted to paint the world. Said it looked too plain." He gave a small smile, then rubbed his thumb over the photo. "I keep it to remember that some things don't stay broken forever. Not if you keep showing up." Maddie didn't know what to say. She reached for a roll of tape, fixed the crack the best she could, and handed it back. "Then we'll keep showing up," she said gently. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Yeah, we will." That night, Maddie cooked spaghetti and garlic bread for everyone. The men gathered around the long table, stories flowing between mouthfuls of food. The laughter came easy, even from Rhett, who usually stayed silent. Maddie caught him smiling once, the faintest hint of peace on his face. After dinner, Rhett walked her to the stairs. "You did good today," he said quietly. "Thanks," she replied. "I like it here. It feels safe." He looked toward the desert through the open door. "It's safe for now," he said. "But the past has long arms. You remember that?" Maddie nodded, unsure what he meant but sensing the weight behind his words. Later, in the loft, she wrote in her phone again. "I didn't break the picture. I made people laugh. I think I belong somewhere." She stared at the last line, heart full and trembling at once. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of engines in the far distance. Soft, almost like a warning. Down below, Rhett turned off the lights, checked the locks, and stood for a moment in the quiet. He looked up toward the loft window and whispered to himself, "Keep showing up." Then he walked out to the porch, lit a cigarette he wouldn't finish, and watched the desert stars burn against the wide, dark sky. The next week passed like a slow sunrise, steady, warm, and full of small blessings Maddie hadn't felt in years. She woke each morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of tools. The men treated her like family, bringing her old cookbooks, spare flowers for the counter, even a radio that played gospel songs when she cleaned. Maddie had learned everyone's rhythm by now. Rhett liked silence when he worked, but always said thank you when she handed him tools. Tanker cracked jokes until everyone groaned. Some of the younger bikers, veterans trying to find their footing again, teased each other good-naturedly, but always treated Maddie with quiet respect. The garage had become a place of strange peace, a home built from broken people who didn't fit anywhere else. For the first time since she could remember, Maddie didn't jump every time she heard a knock. Until one afternoon, the knock came hard and fast, rattling the metal door. Rhett was in the back, changing oil. Maddie was sweeping when she froze at the sound. The knock came again, louder. She stepped forward to open it, then stopped when she heard a voice she knew too well. "Maddie, you in there? Open up, sweetheart." Her blood turned cold. Her mother. Rhett's head appeared around the corner. "Who is it?" Maddie's throat tightened. "My mother." Rhett's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to shift. "Stay back," he said calmly, wiping his hands and walking to the door. He pulled it open halfway. Lydia Brooks stood outside, wearing too much lipstick, her hair wild from the wind. She looked both older and sharper than Maddie remembered. The smile on her face was too wide, her eyes too bright. Well, Lydia said, stepping closer. "You're hard to find, big man. But I'm a mother. I go where my daughter goes." Rhett's voice was even. "You need something?" Lydia pushed the door wider and brushed past him, ignoring the question. "Just came to check on my girl. You didn't think I'd forget her, did you?" Maddie gripped the broom handle. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Oh, baby, relax," Lydia said, turning toward her with false sweetness. "I was worried. You ran off with strangers. People talk." Rhett stood between them quietly, a wall of calm strength. "She's fine here," he said. Lydia's gaze flicked over him, narrowing. "I bet she is. You think you can just take what's mine and buy your way out of it?" Maddie flinched. "Mom, stop!" But Lydia's voice only rose. "You think I don't know what you're doing here? Feeding veterans and hiding behind charity? I know men like you. You wear guilt like a jacket. But I can make one call and remind the law what kind of club you used to run." The garage went silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. Rhett's jaw flexed, but his tone stayed level. "You've said enough?" Lydia smirked. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? Thought so." She turned to Maddie. "You think he's your savior? You have no idea what he's capable of. You don't know the things men like him." "That's enough!" Maddie's voice broke, loud and fierce, shocking them both. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. "You don't get to talk to him like that. You don't get to talk to me like that either." Lydia's mouth opened, then snapped shut. "You're defending him?" "Yes," Maddie said, tears welling. "He's been kinder to me in 1 week than you've been in years." The words hit like a slap. Lydia blinked, her face flickering between anger and something like shame. Then she laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, baby, you think you're free? You're just trading one cage for another." She stepped backward toward the open door. "You'll see who he really is. People always show their true colors." Rhett didn't move or speak. He just held the door as she left. The rumble of her old car faded down the dirt road until there was nothing but wind. For a long moment, no one spoke. Maddie leaned against the counter, her breath coming shallow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She twists everything." Rhett turned to her, calm but firm. "You don't apologize for someone else's storm." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "She'll tell people lies. She always does." "Then we tell the truth louder," he said simply. She met his eyes, and for the first time she saw not just kindness there, but understanding. Someone who knew what it meant to be haunted by the past. That evening, Maddie sat alone on the back steps behind the garage, watching the sunset smear pink and orange across the desert. Tanker came out with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her. "Heard the fireworks," he said quietly. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just tired. Feels like every time I start to breathe, she finds me again." Tanker chuckled softly. "Funny thing about ghosts. They only got power if you turn around and stare." Maddie smiled faintly. "You sound like a preacher." "Nah," he said, sipping his coffee. "Just a man who's been forgiven a few times." Inside, Rhett was locking the door for the night. His movements were slow, thoughtful. When he stepped outside, he saw them sitting there, the big mechanic and the small woman who had brought warmth into his quiet world. "You should both get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's a long day." As they stood to go inside, Maddie looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for standing up for me." He met her eyes. "You stood up for yourself. That's the part that matters." Later, in her loft, Maddie sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the dark hills. She thought about her mother's words, the cage, the lies, the threats, and for once, they didn't hold her. She whispered to the quiet room, "She's wrong. I'm not trapped. I'm home." Downstairs, Rhett turned out the lights and stood by the old photo of his daughter. "Keep her safe," he murmured. "She deserves it." The garage settled into stillness again, but this time, Maddie's heart didn't feel afraid. The past had come knocking, and she had stayed standing. The days that followed her mother's visit were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the heavy kind, the kind that made every noise sharper, every breath slower. Still, Maddie kept herself busy. She found comfort in work. She cleaned the kitchen, balanced the books, and cooked for whoever came through the door. Work steadied her when her heart wanted to tremble. Rhett didn't bring up Lydia again, and neither did she. But there was a new gentleness in the way he spoke to her, like he understood she was carrying something fragile she wasn't ready to set down. One morning, Maddie arrived early to make breakfast. The sunrise painted the desert gold, and the scent of frying bacon filled the air. She turned on the small radio, humming along to a soft gospel tune. The garage door was open to let in the breeze, and for a moment, the world felt almost perfect. Tanker was the first to arrive. He came in rubbing his hands together. "Smells like heaven in here," he said with a grin. "You're spoiling us, miss. Maddie." "Y'all work hard," she said, smiling as she handed him a plate. "Least I can do." Before long, the others trickled in. The long wooden table that Rhett had built years ago filled with laughter and clinking forks. Maddie watched them eat, feeling a strange pride bloom in her chest. These men, rough, scarred, loud, were like family now. Rhett stepped in last, wiping grease off his hands. He nodded toward her with quiet respect. "You keep this place running." "Somebody has to feed your army," she teased lightly. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Guess that's true." When breakfast was done, she helped Tanker wash dishes, while Rhett organized the work orders. Every once in a while, Maddie caught him glancing her way, and though he didn't say much, the look carried something solid. Trust. By noon, the garage hummed with rhythm. Engines roared, radios buzzed, and laughter echoed. Maddie loved the way this place felt alive. Every bolt tightened, every meal served. It all meant something. That afternoon, Rhett found her painting a sign outside the garage. The old Lawson Auto board had faded almost to white. She was kneeling on the ground, brush in hand, concentrating on the new letters. Second ride. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. That new name? She looked up, a streak of paint on her cheek. I thought it fit. You fix bikes, but you also fix people's hope. Rhett chuckled softly. Second ride. Not bad. She tilted her head, unsure. You don't mind? He shook his head. Not one bit. When the paint dried, she stood back and admired it. The bright blue words stood out against the old wood, fresh and full of promise. Rhett nodded toward it. Guess that's what we all need, huh? A second ride. Maddie smiled. Or maybe a first real one. That evening, Maddie helped one of the younger bikers, Joey, a veteran with a limp, write a resume. He wanted to apply for a mechanic's job in town. He stumbled over words, embarrassed by his spelling. Maddie guided him gently, praising each effort. By the time they finished, Joey was smiling for the first time since she met him. When Rhett walked by and saw them laughing, he paused. Maddie looked up and caught his eye. He gave a small nod, as if saying good work, then went back to tightening bolts. Dinner that night was simple: chili, bread, and laughter. Maddie sat across from Rhett, listening as the men shared stories from before the wars, before the pain. Rhett didn't say much, but when he did, everyone listened. His voice carried weight. After dinner, Maddie carried 2 cups of coffee to the back porch where Rhett sat under the dim yellow light. He took the cup with a quiet thank you. You ever think, she asked after a while, that maybe we're all just lost people who found the same road? Rhett stared out at the desert horizon. Lost ain't the problem. Staying lost is. She smiled. You sound like Father Eli. He chuckled low. He used to say that to me. Didn't listen much back then. They sat in easy silence, the cool night wrapping around them. The stars were thick above the desert, clear and endless. For the first time since her mother's outburst, Maddie's chest didn't feel tight. The fear had loosened. Rhett spoke again, his tone softer than she'd ever heard. You've done good here, Maddie. These men, they smile more since you came. This place feels lighter. Her cheeks flushed. It's easy to be kind when someone finally lets you. Rhett nodded slowly, his gaze steady on the horizon. Maybe that's what life's about. Finding the people who let you be kind. Maddie looked at him, her heart catching in a way she didn't understand yet. The night breeze carried the smell of oil and coffee, and the faint sweetness of her hand lotion. When she went upstairs later, she sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about everything that had changed in such a short time. The fear, the hope, the way Rhett's voice had sounded when he said, "You've done good here." She opened her journal app and typed, "I named the garage Second Ride." Joey laughed today. Rhett said I made this place lighter. She stared at the last line until tears filled her eyes. Happy tears, the kind that don't hurt. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden or a mistake. She felt like she belonged. Outside, the desert hummed with crickets and the low hum of distant engines. Downstairs, Rhett checked the locks, paused beneath the new sign, and whispered to the empty air, "You'd like her, kiddo." The stars above burned bright, as if listening. By midweek, the garage had found its rhythm again. The men worked with purpose, Music drifted from the radio, and the new second ride sign gleamed proudly in the sunlight. Maddie felt it every morning, the quiet joy of belonging. She had learned how to read the rhythms of this place, the clink of wrenches, the smell of grease and coffee, the soft whistle Rhett made when he was deep in thought. One afternoon, Rhett called her into the office. He stood by a small metal filing cabinet, holding a folder stuffed with papers. "You're good with numbers," he said. "Think you can help me sort through these donation ledgers?" Maddie took the folder and began sorting. Most of the notes were scribbled in Rhett's messy handwriting, lists of supplies, cash donations, and the names of veterans he'd helped. There were no signatures, no fancy organization logos, just quiet generosity. "Wait," she said, glancing up. "You've been using your own money for this?" He shrugged. "Sometimes it's faster that way." She stared at him. "But this is hundreds of meals. You've helped people start over, pay rent." He nodded, almost uncomfortable. "People need a hand, not a speech." Something in her heart swelled. For all his gruffness, Rhett Lawson was the kindest man she'd ever known. "You're an angel in leather," she murmured without thinking. Rhett looked up, startled. "What?" She blushed. "Nothing. Just, people should know what you do." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Trust me, they wouldn't believe it." That evening, when the men left, Maddie stayed behind to write an article draft for the local paper. She didn't name Rhett, only the group, their charity rides, their meals for the homeless, their support for veterans. Tanker caught her typing and leaned on the doorframe, grinning. "If the boss finds out, he'll pretend to be mad, but he'll be proud." The next week, a small story appeared in the local news. "Angels of Mercy, Bikers Feed the Forgotten." The headline made Maddie laugh and cry at the same time. When Rhett saw it, he didn't say a word. He simply walked over to the counter, poured himself coffee, and read the short column in silence. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't have done that." Her heart sank. "I'm sorry. I just wanted people to see the truth." He folded the paper carefully and met her eyes. "Don't apologize." Maddie blinked. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" His lips twitched into a faint smile. "No, just not used to anyone seeing the good." She smiled through tears. "Well, the world needs to see it." That night, as the garage quieted, Rhett stood outside under the porch light, looking up at the stars. Maddie joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. He took one, his calloused fingers brushing hers. "You ever think," she said softly, "maybe you were meant to do this? To help people who get forgotten?" Rhett sipped his coffee, his gaze far away. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a way to pay for old mistakes." "Maybe both," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and something gentle passed between them. A wordless recognition of 2 people who had been hurt but hadn't quit. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing me." Maddie smiled. "You're hard to miss." He laughed, low and soft, and for a brief moment, the tough biker's face looked almost peaceful. Inside, the lights of the garage flickered warm against the dark. Maddie felt it deep in her heart, the certainty that kindness could grow anywhere, even here among oil stains and broken engines. And for the first time, she realized the truth Rhett carried inside him. Angels didn't always have wings. Some just rode motorcycles and kept their promises. The article changed everything. Within days, strangers began showing up at the garage, neighbors, veterans' families, even a local pastor, offering donations and volunteering to help. The once quiet lot now buzzed with laughter and new life. Maddie stood outside the first Saturday morning after the story ran, watching cars pull in one after another. Tables were set up under tents, covered with trays of food. The smell of barbecue and baked bread floated through the air. Someone strung lights between the fences, turning the dusty yard into something that almost looked like a fair. Rhett stood off to the side, arms crossed, pretending not to smile as Tanker cracked jokes and handed out plates. When Maddie walked over, he gave her a look half amused, half exasperated. "You started all this," she laughed. "Guess people like good news for once." He shook his head. "They like you." That made her blush, but she didn't look away. "They like what you built." Through the afternoon, Maddie worked non-stop, serving food, greeting guests, hugging grateful widows. She even helped a small boy fix his toy truck at one of the workbenches, showing him how to turn a screwdriver. The sight made Rhett pause mid-step and watch her for a long moment. The way she moved, gentle and sure, reminded him of his daughter painting in the yard years ago. When the sun began to set, Maddie climbed onto a small crate near the tables. "Can I say something?" she asked, her voice carrying through the soft music and chatter. The crowd quieted. "This place," she began, glancing at Rhett, "started as a garage. But it's more than that now. It's a second chance for people who thought they'd run out of road. Every meal, every helping hand. It's proof that kindness still works." Applause rose, echoing against the tin walls. Rhett lowered his head, blinking hard. When he looked up, Maddie was smiling at him. As the night deepened, music played, and people danced under the string lights. Tanker twirled an old widow who laughed until she cried. Rhett stood near the edge of the crowd, still as always, until Maddie approached him. "Come on," she said, holding out her hand. He raised an eyebrow. "I don't dance." "You do tonight?" He hesitated, then took her hand. His touch was warm, careful. They swayed slowly to an old country song, the kind that sounded like forgiveness. When the music ended, Maddie rested her head briefly on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me a life worth showing up for." Rhett didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. Later, after the guests left and the lights dimmed, Maddie stood beneath the new "Second Ride" sign. The paint had dried deep and strong. Rhett walked up beside her, the silver bracelet he'd been polishing catching the glow of the lights. He handed it to her. "Found this at a swap meet. Thought it looked like you." The bracelet was simple, engraved with the words, "One ride, one life." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Fits what we do here." Maddie fastened it around her wrist, her chest full. "Feels like hope." Rhett gave a small nod. "That's the point." That night when Maddie lay in bed, her hands folded over the bracelet, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving. She was living. And outside, beneath the stars, Rhett stood beside the glowing sign and whispered into the cool desert air, "Thank you for sending her here." The wind answered in soft gusts, carrying laughter from the night before. It was a sound of beginnings, the kind that healed old wounds and made even the hardest hearts believe in grace again. The next morning, the desert air carried a strange stillness, like the world was holding its breath. Maddie opened the garage door early, expecting another busy day, but a dark car was already parked outside. 2 police cruisers pulled in behind it, their lights flashing red and blue against the pale dawn. Rhett stepped out from his office, calm but alert. "Stay inside," he told Maddie. His voice was steady, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. 3 officers approached, their hands on their belts. The lead one, Sergeant Hartley, held a folder thick with papers. "Rhett Lawson," he said. "We have a warrant to search the premises. There's been a report of financial fraud tied to your charity account." Maddie froze. Fraud? That's not true. Hartley gave her a brief glance. Ma'am, step back, please. Rhett didn't resist. Let them do their job, he said quietly. But Maddie could see it in his eyes, the deep hurt of a man who'd already been judged too many times. The officers searched every corner. They rifled through drawers, took ledgers, and boxed up receipts Maddie had spent hours organizing. Tanker and the others arrived mid-search, confusion written across their faces. What's this about? Tanker asked. Anonymous tip, Hartley said. Says Lawson's been laundering money through his charity. Maddie's stomach turned cold. She didn't have to guess who made the call. Lydia. When the officers found cash in the back safe, a small stack Rhett used to pay for veterans' food runs. Hartley's expression hardened. That's enough for us to bring you in. Rhett didn't argue. He simply handed over the keys. Take care of the place, Tanker, he said. Maddie stepped forward, trembling. Wait, that money's for meals. He's not a criminal. Please, you're making a mistake. Rhett looked at her, his eyes steady but tired. It's all right, Maddie. No, it's not, she cried, tears spilling. He reached out, brushing his thumb lightly against her hand. You trust me, right? She nodded through sobs. Then trust that this isn't the end. The officers led him outside. Maddie followed until they put him in the back seat of the cruiser. The door shut with a dull thud that felt like a punch to her heart. When the cars drove away, the yard felt empty, hollow. The men stood in silence, the echo of engines fading down the road. Tanker laid a hand on her shoulder. We'll fix this, kiddo. Maddie shook her head. She did this, she whispered. My mother. She wanted to hurt him through me. Tanker sighed. Then we'll show her she failed. That night, the garage was too quiet. Maddie wandered through the empty halls, her fingers tracing the walls that had once felt alive. She found Rhett's Bible on the desk, pages worn and full of notes. Verses were underlined, words like forgiveness, endurance, and grace. On the last page he'd written, "Keep showing up, even when the world says don't." She pressed the book to her chest and whispered through her tears, I will. Outside, a storm gathered over the desert. Thunder rolled low and deep, and lightning flashed across the sky like a warning. Maddie sat at Rhett's desk long after the rain began, staring at the empty chair across from her. He had said this wasn't the end. But for the first time since she'd arrived, the garage felt cold, like the heart of it had been taken away. Still, as the storm raged outside, Maddie made a promise. She would clear his name. No matter how long it took, no matter who stood in her way. And with that, she closed the Bible, wiped her tears, and whispered into the thunder, You're not alone, Rhett, not anymore. The morning after Rhett's arrest, the garage felt like a ghost town. The tools hung untouched, the radio silent, and the smell of oil seemed to have faded from the air. Maddie sat at Rhett's desk, staring at the empty chair across from her. Every creak in the building made her flinch. For the first time since she'd come here, she felt truly alone. But loneliness turned into determination. Rhett had believed in her, and now it was her turn to fight for him. She picked up the folder of receipts the officers hadn't taken and began sorting through every number, every note he'd written. His handwriting, crooked, hurried, was proof of honesty, not deceit. By noon, she was at the courthouse. People stared when she walked in, whispering about the girl from the biker garage. She held her head high. At the clerk's window, her voice didn't tremble. I'm here for Rhett Lawson's bail hearing, she said. Outside the courtroom, reporters hovered, asking if the rumors were true. He's innocent, she said firmly. And I'll prove it. When she got back to the garage that evening, Tanker and a few of the men were waiting. "We've got your back," Tanker said. "You lead, we follow." They gathered around the long table, forming a plan. Maddie called every veteran Rhett had helped. She wrote emails, posted online, begged people to speak up. One by one, messages started coming in. Stories of Rhett fixing bikes for free, paying for funerals, saving lives. By nightfall, the garage lights glowed again. Maddie sat in Rhett's chair, typing up statements, her fingers shaking but her resolve solid. She wasn't the scared woman who once hid behind her mother's shadow. When exhaustion hit, she opened Rhett's Bible and found the note again. "Keep showing up." She smiled through tears. "I am," she whispered. Outside, the moon rose over the quiet desert, lighting the new second ride sign. The wind carried the faint hum of distant engines, as if the men Rhett helped were already on their way back. Maddie folded her hands, praying softly. "God, give me strength to stand until he can stand again." And somewhere, she believed Rhett could feel it. The stubborn, shining hope of a woman who refused to let his story end here. The courthouse was crowded when Maddie walked in. Reporters whispered as she passed, clutching Rhett's worn Bible in her hands. Her knees trembled, but her heart beat steady. This was the day she would speak, the day she would tell the truth. Inside, Rhett sat at the defense table, wrists free but face drawn and tired. When their eyes met, Maddie gave a small nod. "Keep showing up," she thought. The judge called her to the stand. She stood tall, her voice soft but sure. "My name is Maddie Brooks. The night my mother sold me, this man, Rhett Lawson, didn't buy me. He saved me. He gave me food, work, and a place where broken people could breathe again." A hush fell over the room. Maddie went on, her voice shaking only once. "He doesn't steal. He gives. The money you call missing bought meals for veterans, beds for widows, and hope for people no one else would touch." Her words spread through the courtroom like light. Tanker and the men from the garage stood in the back, heads bowed. Then, one by one, others rose. Veterans, widows, townsfolk, all speaking up for Rhett. The judge leaned forward, listening. Papers shuffled, murmurs rose. Maddie clutched the Bible tighter, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He taught me that mercy's not weakness," she finished. "It's what keeps this world alive." Silence. Then the judge cleared his throat. "This court will review the evidence, but I've heard enough to know the measure of this man." Later that evening, Maddie visited Rhett through the glass at the holding center. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "Heard you made quite a speech." "I just told the truth," she said. He placed his hand against the glass. "You're braver than you think." She pressed her hand to his, the barrier cold between them. "You told me to keep showing up," she whispered. "Now it's your turn." His eyes softened. "I will." As she left the building, the sun broke through the clouds, painting gold across the courthouse steps. Maddie looked up, heart full. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for sure. Grace had a way of finding the light. A month later, the charges against Rhett were dropped. The truth came out. His charity records matched every donation, every expense, every act of kindness. The anonymous tip was traced back to Maddie's mother, now in rehab, her confession handwritten and tear-stained. The judge called Rhett a man of quiet honor. The day he walked free, the garage doors were thrown open wide. Veterans lined the driveway, holding handmade banners that read, "Faith rides again." Maddie stood at the front, her hands trembling as Rhett stepped out of the truck. The sunlight caught the gray in his hair, and for the first time in weeks, He looked alive again. Tanker hugged him hard. "Told you we'd keep it running," he said. Rhett grinned, then turned to Maddie. "You kept your promise." She smiled through tears. "You told me to keep showing up." The crowd cheered as Rhett raised his hands in thanks. But later, when everyone left, he and Maddie stood alone under the fading light. The garage was quiet again, filled with the hum of peace. "You saved this place," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, you did. I just reminded people who you are." He looked at her then, his eyes warm. "You reminded me who I am." That night, Maddie organized a community dinner to celebrate. The long table stretched across the garage, covered in casseroles, pies, and laughter. Tanker gave a toast. "To second rides, and the folks who make 'em worth taking." Everyone clapped and raised their glasses. As the evening faded, Rhett found Maddie outside near the new sign. The moonlight made the words "Second Ride" glow faintly blue. He handed her a letter, her mother's. Maddie opened it slowly. The words were messy but honest. "I was wrong. He gave you what I couldn't. Dignity. I'm trying to be better. Please forgive me." Tears blurred her vision. "I do forgive her," she whispered. Rhett nodded. That's what she needed to hear. They stood in silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Maddie slipped the letter into her pocket and turned to him. "What now?" Rhett smiled faintly. "Now, we ride again." He reached out, his rough hand covering hers. The night wind brushed through the desert, carrying the scent of rain and the soft sound of laughter from inside. For the first time, Maddie felt the road ahead open wide and clear. A second ride, not of escape, but of homecoming. Weeks passed, and the second ride foundation blossomed into something beautiful. The garage that once smelled of oil and metal now carried the warmth of coffee, baked bread, and laughter. The long workbench had turned into a serving table, covered in trays of food, and the men who once hid behind leather and silence now served meals with open smiles. Maddie stood behind the counter each morning, her silver bracelet catching the light as she wrote down names and offered seconds. People came from miles around. Veterans, widows, tired mothers, lost souls who needed a place to rest. No one was turned away. Maddie made sure of that. Her soft voice and steady kindness became the heartbeat of the place. Rhett worked beside her every day, still quiet, but his silence had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was peace. When visitors thanked him for saving their lives, he always nodded toward her. "She's the reason we kept going," he'd say. One golden evening, they held their first community dinner. Rows of motorcycles lined the dusty lot, headlights glowing like candles in the twilight. String lights hung across the fence, casting warm halos over the tables. The sound of laughter and music drifted across the desert. Tanker cracked jokes while serving chili, and the veterans swapped stories about their glory days. Maddie moved between tables with a wooden spoon and a heart full of joy. An elderly widow stopped her, touching her arm. "You're proof," she said, eyes glistening, "that kindness still wins." Maddie smiled, blinking back tears. "I think kindness was just waiting for us to notice." When the plates were cleared and the stars filled the sky, Maddie stepped outside. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and gasoline. Rhett joined her quietly, his hands tucked in his jacket. "Hard to believe," she said softly. "I came here with nothing." Rhett looked at her, his voice rough but warm. "You came with everything that mattered: heart, faith, and fight." She laughed, a sound gentle as wind through the desert grass. "Sometimes," she said, "angels really do wear leather." Rhett smiled at that, reaching for her hand. Together they stood beneath the wide, endless stars, the sound of engines humming faintly in the distance, a song of second chances and quiet redemption. For Maddie, this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new ride, one built on grace, courage, and the power of choosing love over fear. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.